Hey everyone, so today we're going to be using the popular babies names API, which we're going to get from NYC Open Data. And it's a way how you can get the popular baby names based on the gender or the ethnic group. And you can see that we're getting this from, again, NYC Open Data. I'll add the URL in the description so you can check it out, as well as the endpoint. Now let's just take a look at what the data is going to look like. So you see we can get the year. I'll maximize this. So you see we can get the year, and we can get the gender, the ethnicity, and the name, and we can see how many of those names were happened during that period, and then the rank that it got. If you scroll down there, it's a bunch of them. So let's back out for a second, and let's just grab our API endpoint. So we'll click on Actions, API, hit this, copy the endpoint, and now let's add new tab. Just paste this here just to look at what the data looks like. Okay, so this is pretty much what it looks like. It's all strings, and it pretty much just gives us the data we want. Okay, all count. It's really abbreviated, but we can still use it. So let's back out again, and let's just jump into Xcode. So say create new project, and then for this I'll hit app, and for this I'll just call it baby names, and then I'll hit create here, and then let's maximize this, and let's zoom in a bit. Make sure you... Okay, I can go in a bit more too. All right. And now what we have right here as our preview loads is basically the boilerplate code for SwiftUI. So when this preview loads, you'll see that we see the image matching it. We see a globe image here, and then the world, hello world. If we change this, we see it happens. So let's cut this stuff. As you know, if you watch my previous streams, you know I love using tab views. So I'm going to start out with a tab view in our content view. And then I'm going to jump over here and create a new folder. And I'm going to call this names view. Let's just call this names. Baby names. Let's just call it baby names view. Then we're going to create a new Swift file in here, and we're going to call that baby names view. And because we're going to be using MVVM for this to handle fetching the data from using the service, let's just create our view model from now too. We're going to say Swift file, baby names, view model. Cool. All right, so let's leave it blank for now, but we'll jump back to this pretty soon. So now for our baby names view that we have here, let's add this to our tab view so we can start seeing that show up whenever we run the app. And then let's give it a tab item, and let's use a vstack for this. And then we want that image, and we're going to use a system name. And then what image go well for a person? Let's try for now. Let's just do person. And then like we'll use SF symbols. Where is it? Right here, to pick a better image in a sec. So now let's see text, and then we'll say baby names. I'm wondering though, can I put a... Let's see if I can put an emoji here. Let's do this. All right, I'm gonna put pretty dark this one. So we do get it, but it's extremely small. What I could do is say font.title. That improved. So that didn't. So we'll go ignore this and just go with what we had before. And go with that image, system name, and let's just put person for now. I'll go with that. So now what we need to do is actually see if we can create a service layer that we can actually get the data from the API. So to do that, we're going to first start by creating our first folder. I will call this services. And then inside here, we'll create a new Swift file. We'll call this, we're going to call it services too. API services, let's do that. Okay. And then what we can do now is say protocol, create a protocol this is gonna pretty much match what our service layer should do, like tell like what it should do. So we could say API services, and then remember we want to fetch the popular names. So we'll say fetch baby names, and then because we're using Swift Concurrency, we have to add an extra keyword here, and that keyword is async. Also, we want to handle our errors by throwing, so we'll say throws here. So what we want to do is basically make it that whenever we get this, back to it, whenever we get this data, I'll zoom in some more too. Yeah, so whenever we get this data, I want to convert it to a model that we can use in our app. So right now we don't have a way to do that, but we want to return something like an array of baby names, something like this, right? So to do this, we have to actually create our baby name model first. So let's create a new folder, and we're going to say new folder. We're going to call this models. And then inside there, we're going to create another Swift file. And this is going to be models too. And if like you need to, if you miss something, just feel free to just push back or replay back a little bit and continue back. All right. So now let's do struct. Now we'll call this baby name. And then we know from our previous streams that whenever we're going to fetch some data from the API and decode it using our transform it using our model, we have to mark the struct our model with a decodable protocol. So we're going to do that right now, right? Decodable. So we'll do that. And then there's one other protocol that we have to add, but I'll add that a bit later. If you watch the previous streams, you should already know what that is. I'll give you a hint. It starts with an I. But let's jump back to mapping our data. So now with our model, let me just make this fully to the side. And then for here, I'll make this right side. All right, so these are the parameters that we need. So let's just add all of them in. And good thing is they're all pretty much strings. So let's do that. String. And then the next one. I'm wondering if it's better if I just type these out versus copying. I feel like I could type it out a little bit fast. Let's try that. Oh. So, THCY string, that's a string. And then we have NM, which is another string, and then CNT. Then we had the last thing we have is RNK, which represents our like the position of how popular that name is. All right, so now we have basically our model that can represent this data that we get from the API. So we can minimize this and just maximize Xcode again. All right, so now what we're going to do is jump back to our services. Since we have our model that we want to use, we're going to make it return an array of baby name. And now what we need to do is create a class that will actually implement this protocol. Let's say class API services impl, like implementation. You can name it whatever you want. You just have to make sure that it conforms to the service protocol that we created. And then we'll say fetch baby names. All right. The next thing that we need is actually the endpoint. Let's get rid of this block. We need the actual endpoint of what that we're going to hit to get the data. So let's jump back to over here. I'll do it this way. So to get it, if you're on this page, usually you probably start off on this page. All you have to do is click actions here, API, and then you just copy this endpoint that we have here. So let's maximize Xcode again. Yeah. Now we're just going to create a private variable to hold our endpoint that we're going to use. Nobody else needs access to this, so let's just make it private. And we'll hit this. We're done what we actually wanted there, so let's cut that. Only want the JSON up to this point. Now, the first thing we have to do is we have to convert this string endpoint to a URL that we can use to get the data. So to do that, we can say gar let URL equal URL, and then pass in the endpoint up there. Then we'll say else. And remember, we want to return an array of baby names, those models, but right now in this case, this would be an error. So how we want to handle this is, since we marked it with throws, is basically adding in some custom errors. So if you're familiar with previous streams, again, you'll have seen me use a similar method. So I'm going to say API service error, error, and then make it conform to error. I'm going to add in all the cases right now. Invalid URL that we're going to need. We're going to also need an invalid response that could happen when we check the status code. And then let's add a custom one too that we can use for passing in the error that we get from the system. So now right here where we would have a URL issue. If you have an issue, let's throw a API services error, that invalid URL error. Let's throw that. And now that we have that, so right here, just in case I was blocking you, so we converting basically our endpoint to a URL and then putting it inside the URL here. If we have an error and not able to do this, we're going to throw this error. We're going to basically cause an error to happen. So you still see this, you notice this error message here coming up. It's basically saying that this function requires us to return an array of baby name, but we're not doing that right now. And it's because we haven't gotten to that portion. So to handle this, let's temporarily just have it return an empty array here, just to silence that error until we actually have the result in. The next thing we're going to do is actually hit the endpoint. And to do that, we're going to say let data response, right? And then we're going to say URLSession shared data task, and we're going to look for the one that uses async throws and accepts just a URL. So we have this here, so we'll just say URL, right? And what we could do now is basically say, actually, let's use a URL request. Usually in our last stream, we used the URL, so let's try with a URL request. Let's add the trier away here. So to create a URL request, all we have to do is say var URL request, and just say URL request. It takes a URL, so we're just going to throw in that URL to this same URL. And the difference with this versus just using a regular URL is that we could add on additional parameters. So say if we want to add a filter based on only on specific gender or specific ethnicity, we can use URL request to do that. So let's plop URL request here, right? And then one thing we're gonna need, say, I think it's off on this, and then we'll add this in later on. But yeah, so basically now what we're doing is basically able to fetch the data from the API. And what it does is returns a tuple with a data type and a response type. The other thing is that, as we see, we can mark this as a try. And usually when you're working with a try response, it's best to pretty much put that inside a do catch. So I'll just pop that here. And then for the catch response, we're just gonna simply say, we're gonna use our custom, we're gonna use our error that can occur. So this would be throw, and we'll say API services error, and let's just make this a custom error. And then for the data that we're going to put in here, we're just going to use error.localize description. And again, this error variable here, I didn't create it. It's actually available to inside any catch block that you are. So now the next thing that we have to do is we need to check the response to make sure that it's a valid response size between 200 or 299. So to do that, the first thing we have to do is convert our response, which is this. Remember, we got this from making the API call. So we need to convert this to a HTTP URL response. We need to change type, so we're going to cast it as a HTTP URL response. And then we're going to say else throw our custom error that we made earlier, which is this invalid response. API service error, that invalid response, right? And the one thing also that we want to check, I missed it here, but we want to check the actual status code, and we can get that off HTTP URL response. So to do that, let's just hit there. Let's just push this over a bit. And right here, we're going to say 200, 299. And we're going to check if our status code is between this range, is a value that's between 200 and 299, which is the valid status code range. So say HTTP URL response, status code, right? And if both of these fail, then this will pretty much fall, this error will throw. So now that we are handling our error, now the fun part is we're actually going to decode our data. So to do that, let's use JSON decoder. I'm going to say decode, and then you have to put in the type that you want to convert or transform your data to. So remember, we want to transform it to an array of baby names. So to do that, we're going to say array, add in the name here. Then we're going to say self, and then we're going to pass in the data, this one right here that we originally got, right? And then the thing is that this call can throw, it even says it here this morning, so it's a mark it with a try. I remember what we were saying earlier, usually if you're handling calls that can throw, it's best you put them in a do catch. Now we are already inside this do catch, but for this decoding error, I highly recommend putting it in its own do catch, because some of the API data sets on NYC Open Data, sometimes some of the values are nil and you might not know. And if you try to fetch that data expecting it to be a string or something, it could result in a crash. So I would say just do the check. I'll do a check here. I'm going to pay. Oh, let me add the catch part. I don't know where my pointer went. Catch. I'll have it just throw the same custom error that we added. Blah, blah, blah. And error dot localize description. And now in here, I'm going to say let baby names equal the same thing that we had. Try JSON decoder, decode it as an array of them. Now, we can just clear up some of the space here. And you see that now we don't need this. Remember, we added this just to return something that would an empty array so that we don't see that error keep popping up. So we can get rid of this. Oh, let me scroll down. So we got rid of this. Let me scroll up. Yeah. So we got rid of this empty parameter, empty arrays return here that we added just to prevent an error from popping up. So let's get rid of that. And it's still saying that there's an error, and that's because we're not actually returning the baby names now. So to fix this, we have to return the model that we just decoded. So let's just head here and say return. And now this error will disappear. So basically now we have our server logic, our API logic, to fetch the data that we might need from the API. So that's good. So what we can do is, now what we want to do is basically download this data, get it, and then show it inside our view. So to do that, we have to use our view model. So let's start filling out our view model now. So I say class names view model, and let's make it an observable object so that we can listen for different changes that might happen. And then we have to make it that this view model has access to the services that we just made. So over here. So to do that, we have to add it as a dependency using dependency injection. So we'll just say let services. Let's call this API services, referring to the protocol, not the actual class implementation. And that's going to help with unit testing, because then we can pass in a mock version of our API class service layer, because we shouldn't be making real API calls in our unit testing. And now we'll just add the initializer here. And I'm going to add a default value for this view model, because I don't want to initialize this every single time, except for when we're doing unit tests. So now what we need to do is actually use our services that we have here to actually get the type of data. So say func fetch names, and then inside here we'll say something like names, and then we'll say services, right? And then fetch it. And we're gonna get a couple errors here. So the first one is, remember, fetch baby names is an asynchronous call. So you see it's marked with async. So basically any function that's using it must be asynchronous too. So to fix this, we just add the async keyword here. And now we have another error because remember this call can also throw, so we have to mark it with a try. But because we want to handle our errors, we're gonna do a do catch. I'm gonna use a do catch for this. So we're gonna say do, plop that in here, and then we're gonna say catch, right? And then for now, let's just do print error. Now we have a value here that should be returning us the model that we need. So let's see if scroll up. Then we're gonna do a dump, and then we're gonna say baby names, right? And now what we want to do is basically call this function just to check to make sure that we're actually getting the names correctly and our model is working. Oh yeah, I forgot to add a try. Wait, yeah. And now that should go over. All right, so now what we want to do is actually make it that we can use our view model inside our actual view. Is this? So to do this, we have to introduce it to it. So to do that, we're gonna say at state object. Our view model, and then we're gonna actually call the name of our view model. And we could actually just make it equal to it too. Right? Since it already has a default initializer for our services. But actually, yeah, let's just do the type. I like when I do the type. Let's go with that. Oh, that's the name. So you can do either one. You'll still pretty much get the same result. I just prefer doing just a type. That way, where I'm calling this, so in our content view, this is going to require us to add a view model like this. Whenever I add this, this will create this view model. It will automatically use the initialize service. Now, what will happen now is that this view model service will just be passed down instead of creating a new one. So I prefer this way. So now let's update our preview, adding in the same thing. And now we have a access to our view model inside our view. So now what we're going to do is just add a v stack. Let's do text, and let's say some name. Doesn't really matter what you put here. Put something else besides some name, something that you might like. And then for here, this is the main goal, is we're going to add a task modifier, and we're going to make it that whenever this view appears, this task block will run. And what I want to run is this function that we have here. I remember we set the breakpoint, so if we get an error, it will hit this breakpoint. If we don't, it will hit this breakpoint. So let's minimize this and run again. Okay, it takes my time while Xcode runs, and as you see, we hit the right breakpoint that we wanted. We hit baby names right here, so we know our data is successfully being decoded. So we can get rid of these breakpoints, and let's just look at what the data looks like. So let's make it step to the next one. And you see, we see a list of all of them. So this is exactly what we want. So now we can pretty much start using this data. So let's get rid of this. And this is the reason why I prefer dump. You see how it presents the data in a much more easier to read way versus just printing it. So now what we want to do is get rid of dump. And we can stop the Xcode from running. Now what we want to do is actually use this variable inside our SwiftUI view, our baby names view, instead of just having some text here that says some name. So to do this, we have to jump back to our baby's view model, and remember we made it conform to observable object. So what I will do is make it that we can basically make it that a view can listen to changes from it. So like say if a changes happen to a specific type of property, then if a change happened to that specific type of property in the view model, the SwiftUI view will update to show that change right away. So to make it that the view can listen to that specific type, we have to create a new variable. I'm going to call it a publish type. and then it's going to be var baby names, and then we'll just make it an array of the same type that we want, and we will make this an empty array. And the way how we're making that it listens for like any changes that happen to this variable is because we marked it with a published decorator. And we also made our view model conform to observable object, so that it knows that like listen for these changes. And then the view knows that, well, this view model, I need to listen for changes from it because it's marked with a state object. All right. So now what we want to do is, instead of just passing the data that we get from the API to just some variable inside this scope, right? What we want to do is add it to this variable instead, baby names. So instead of initializing the variable here, let's just use this type that we have up here, that whenever it changes, the SwiftUI view will update. So to actually show this in our view now, let's add a list. And then here we'll say urban name, say in, and we're gonna get an error here soon, but I'll explain why. Okay, so you're gonna see an error show up here. Yeah, so the error we're seeing here is because basically we're trying to, whenever you're using like a new type, a specific type, like a custom type, like our, jump to it. Here it says requires that baby name conform to identifiable. So whenever you're using like a custom type, like our type here, additional conformance that we need to do besides decodable is identifiable. And that's for when you're trying to iterate over some array inside a SwiftUI view. And this is the requirement to do that. So the identifiable protocol though requires one additional parameter. So you have to have a parameter called ID, and it has to be called ID. And what I like to do in this case where it's like my API response doesn't give me an ID parameter, I just usually just create a UUID, and then that suffices. And if I jump back to my view now, you see that error disappears. Now to actually, let's update this so that we can show some text. So now it should see, if we load our preview, we'll just see a list of the birth years. See that? Now what we want to see is actual name. So we'll say NM, and we see each of them, every single one. All right, cool. So now what we want to do is, I kind of want to have a title up here that kind of says the same thing. So to do that, I am going to, inside our baby names view, I'm going to wrap all of this inside a navigation stack. So I'm going to cut it temporarily now. I'm going to say navigation stack, right? And then I'm going to repaste it right here. I'll see it again. And now I have to add one additional modifier, and that's going to be navigation title, texture. And then I'll just give it a different title. Encourage you to add your own titles. If you feel like you have a better idea for a title, then just try that one. All right, so now what we have here is basically a basic list. We can scroll up and down, we can see it. Let's run it in the simulator so we can actually see how the full app is actually running. And let's dismiss this for now, it's kind of distracting. Move this over here. So we have this, so we have a basic view, we can see all the names. So now let's fill out the actual row, that details row that we have for all that data. So if we, see one error here. So you see how it says, let me scroll up here before we do that. You see how it says here, it says publishing changes from background thread is not allowed. Make sure to publish values from the main thread. The reason we're seeing this is because if I jump back to our view model and maximize this for a second, you see even Xcode flags it. It says you're trying to update, you're updating this value on, like when you get the API data, you're doing this asynchronously, and then you're using this baby names value to update the SwiftUI view. And because you're doing that, it has to be done on the main thread. Like updating the view has to be done on the main thread. Getting the data, that's fine. You can do that async. But to fix this, all we have to do is mark our function with a main actor. And then if we rerun this, you notice that, and we scroll around, you notice that we won't see that flagged error anymore. See, I'm scrolling around, scrolling up, and then I still don't see it. And if I stop it, still don't see it. So that's good right there. So now what we want to do is see if we can build out our view to actually show more data. So let's, instead of just having one text here, right? And I'll load a preview so you can see like a visual. Right, so instead of just having one text here, let's add a V stack instead. And like build out what our row view is, each row in the view is gonna look like. So we have one parameter called that name, right? I feel like that should be at the top. I feel like this should be bolded since it's like the main thing. Let's increase the title, make it a title 2, and then let's make it bold. Decent. And I'll minimize this just so I can look at the API. And from the API, I can see it says like this. It says like the name, the amount of them, the rank. I feel like rank should be right across from it. So we should have like name and then rank. So let's just add that in. Maximize this again. And I'm gonna just add this inside the H stack. So I'll just right click it, and then do embed in H stack. Add a spacer here. And then for here, right next to it, I'm gonna say text name dot rank. Right? And now we see the rank that that name got. So the other thing that I feel like would be really good for this, especially for the rank section, is actually showing the date. Like, so it was ranked like this for which date. So what we can do is add another nested V stack. So also embedded in V stack. And then let's make this aligned to the trailing. Trailing. Right? And now we're going to add another text here. I remember this is going to represent pretty much the year. So we'll say that name, that year, birth year. And we'll have that kind of under it. So it's kind of hard to know what this one represents. So let's add like some type of text here. Let's just cut this. I'm going to say string rank. And let's use it like this. Okay, so now we have more detail as to like what exactly this means, right? So what's another property that we could use is we have gender, Isabella, and ethnicity. Gender and ethnicity. Okay, let's use those. Jump back to Xcode. And then right under basically this is our V stack, everything here, right? All that stuff, this name and this going across. And one thing before we do that, you notice that it's not aligned properly to the top. It's more so centered, like Chloe's to the center, all of this. To fix that, all we have to do is add an alignment. And then we'll say top. And now you see it kind of pushes, like it kind of matches right there. Cool. So now right under this is where we could start adding like say gender. So minimum. Roll up some more so you can see that. And I wish I didn't abbreviate it this much. And you see how it just pushes it to the center of that? We don't want that to keep happening. So let's fix our alignment in the main V stack up here. So say alignment, leading. You see it kind of pushes, and that's kind of what we were looking for there. So it says female there. And then I don't think we need to make this capitalized, all caps. So let's just change that to capitalize. That looks much better. Now the other thing, I think it was race. So let's add something on the right under here, and we're going to call this text name. What was it? Ethnicity. And you see that here. Same thing for this. Don't think we need that to be completely capitalized. Or if we're going to capitalize it, we could make it a smaller font. So we could say something like font that, maybe let's see what caption looks like. Yeah. So we could keep it capitalized, but we'll change it to pretty much look like this. And so if we run this again, see what it looks with a full simulator. See that we pretty much have this right here. Right. Cool. So now we can kind of see all of that detail for each user. Right. All right. So this is basically our main goal for the app right now. There's a couple more tweaks that we can add in. So I'm thinking that one, we should add a spinner. So say if the user arrives on the screen and like maybe their data API, their Wi-Fi is really slow, we need to show them like a spinner to let them know some work is being done. So to do that, let's just stop our simulator and then we're going to maximize this. And now we're going to jump back to our view model here. And we're going to add one more property. We're going to add a publish var is loading. And this is just to be a boolean. And this is going to determine whether we show the progress view or not. So basically, when we want to start showing the progress view, let me scroll up, is when we start fetching that data. So inside our fetch names pretty much function, this is like the best place to put it. So we'll say is loading. We'll set this to true. And then basically what we would want to do is basically after it's done fetching the data, we want to turn off is loading. Also set this to false. Another time when we'd want to turn off the progress view is if say we get an error. So let's just put one here. Now all we have to do is jump back to our view. And we're going to add one modifier. And this is going to be called an overlay. I'm going to say dot overlay. So that we can show something. Overlay makes that you can show something on top of another view. So to do this, we're going to say if view model that is loading, this is true, then show a progress view. We're going to give this a title. This is going to be say something like fetching names. Fetching names. Let's give it a emoji here. So this is a chicken. Right? And now what we could do is if we run this, the API is really fast, which is good. So you didn't really see it flash just now. So what we could do is tap this. And if we go back to our view model, I know this is success. So right now you see this is where I'm turning off the spinner. Like I'm basically saying we got the data, so hide the spinner. I'm gonna temporarily just comment this out. And then if I run this again, you'll see that the spinner doesn't disappear. So you keep seeing it here. So we know that we're at least, so this is pretty much what's gonna happen as you're fetching the data. And then after you finish fetching it, as long as you set back is loading to false, then it will go away. One thing I noticed here is that I didn't spell fetching right. So let's just jump back and fix that. Then let's jump back to our view. So now the other thing that we want to do is basically make it that we can show error alerts if they should happen. Like say if maybe the API call fails, or like I was saying, there's a parameter that's actually nil when you expect it to have a value. So to do that, let's jump back to our services. And then our API service that we have here, we are just gonna modify it a bit. So we're gonna add something like var. We're gonna say error message. And then let's just have this be a string to error message. And then I say switch on self. So we're gonna switch on each case that is available to us. I like doing autocomplete, so hit this one. And then what's gonna happen is, so I'm gonna add a more readable, understandable error message that can happen for each case. So for invalid URL, I would want to see an error message that says something like invalid URL. But you can change this to be something that's more beneficial for you. And then I could say invalid response. Let's just change this. I don't know why Swift named it string. And then for custom error, let's do our classic something went wrong. right? And then we are going to add the error message that we actually get from the system, not ours. I remember for customs, we're passing in error.localize description. So now we have our custom error here. So now if we jump back to our view model, in here, instead of while we're just printing it, what we're going to do is convert our error type to our custom error. So we're going to say if let custom error is equal to error, right? And then we're going to cast it, transform it to our type of error. This is going to be API service error. Now that we have our custom error, remember we have a property on it called custom error message, which is the readable message that we created. Just comment this out for now. We're going to create two things. We're going to create a property called not is loading, but it's going to be show error alert. This is going to be a boolean too, and this is going to be the boolean that determines whether the alert will show up or not, right? And now we're going to add one more, and this is going to basically be the message that we show when the boolean shows up or not. So I'm going to say error message. It's going to be a string, right? And then we scroll back down here, and then where we were writing this says uncomment this, and then custom error. Whatever we get there, we'll put it inside error message, which is this property here. Now next, what we do is once that gets the error message, we want to show an error alert. So we could do something like show error alert toggle. As soon as it toggles, we'll see that error alert. So if we jump back to the view, and then we have to add one more modifier, and this will be a really straightforward one. It will just be dot alert, and I'll scroll down to this one, which just takes a boolean and some alert content, and I'll say $ view model that show error alert. And then if we hit this, we'll add the view that is required for it, title. And then for text, remember we have a property that actually holds the string for the error message we want. So for this, we can say view model error message, right? And whenever this, so basically whenever we have an error, this show error alert will toggle and we'll see that error pop up. So if we run this now, we won't see the alert because API is working as expected. So to kind of force it to fail and have an error, what we can do is let's stop that. We'll maximize again. And what we're going to do is jump back to services. And basically, we're just going to mess up the endpoint that we're using. So I'll just get rid of some stuff like this. And then I'll run again. You can mess up any part of the URL. And you see we get some error that says something went wrong, could not connect to the server. So we know now that we're actually seeing our error alerts, which is perfect. The only issue now that I'm seeing is that if there is a case where the array of names is empty, the user just sees this basic blank screen. Not a fan of that. So let's see if we can fix it. Let's just fix back our API endpoint, what it was before, since we know it will handle for error cases that might be happening. And what we're going to do is jump to our view, right? And then you see here where it says list, and you have all of this stuff right here. Basically, what we want to do is wrap this list inside a check that see if the names are empty, then show a separate view. If they're not, then show this view. So one thing though is, all right, so I'm gonna do this first and then I'll show you that. So let's button right here. Yeah, so all we could do now is we're just gonna say at the top of this, say if view model that names is empty, but we don't want to really show it if it's empty. We want to show the list if it's not empty, so we're gonna say is not empty. And I'm opening up my curly braces there. And then I'm going to wrap that inside our list view. And I'm going to show you a way how you can handle our view, because you see how big this got. So I'm going to show you a way. And then we'll say else, do this. I think I put this at the wrong spot. Let's just cut this real quick. I think it should be right below this one. Okay, yeah. This is a good reason why you should definitely cut down the size of your views. So because of the size of this view here, it's hard for me to tell where the curly brace ends. I'm going to show you a quick way how to fix that, and then we'll jump back right to this. So to do this, let's undo for a second. Then we're going to undo to the point where we don't have this if statement here. And we shouldn't see any errors, right? What we're going to do is, you see this entire massive row that we have here? We're going to put this inside its own separate view. Let's just copy this real quick. Cut. Then we're going to jump over to here. Let's just create a new folder and call this row view. All right. And then we're going to create a new SwiftUI file, and we're going to call this row view. And then we're going to plop the same thing that we copied previously that was inside our list inside this block too. And I'm going to get rid of this. And you see it's complaining because it doesn't know what baby name is. So that's pretty much the model that we were passing in for each element in the array. So to resolve this, just update our view to require it. So say name. Let's add the type. Our preview is gonna complain about this, so you could update this if you want. For now, I'll just add in some quick stuff. This is all strings. I don't think it will be too long. So black. Okay. Do 12. Let's do 3. All right. So now we just satisfy the preview, and that's just so we could show that data in this preview screen here. Cool. And they're to the size right now because basically inside our list that we were using it, that automatically adds padding. So if you want to see a similar view to what we had in the list, update that padding in your preview, not your actual view here. Because if you add padding, say here on this view, it's gonna affect where you're actually showing it in the list. So let's just add that real quick. Padding. Let's just get rid of that. And see, it kind of looks similar now to what we had before. But now let's jump back to our main view. And inside our list now, we're just gonna say row view. And then just pass in the name that it requires. Nice. Now, as you see, it's still working as expected. It's the same thing. I'll run it too, just to make sure you can see. And you see, yeah, it's the same exact view. Perfect. So now let's stop this, and then we're gonna maximize again. And now we're gonna go back to what we were doing, where we wanted to show a different view if the main view was empty. So to fix this, we'll just say if view model that is empty, is not empty, then we show this list view, right? Otherwise, if it's not empty, which is else block, we're gonna show a content unavailable view. I'm gonna use one that takes a title, system image, and a description. So for this, I'll say title will be like, no baby names found. Let's add like an emoji here too. Let's add this one. And then for system image, let's just add like a magnifying glass, like we're trying to search for it. And for text right here, we could add more detail on what might be the issue. So we could say something like, please check your internet connection for cellular data. And let's add not an emoji here. And now what will happen is whenever our array is empty, we will see a new content unavailable view. To check this, what we could do is make it that whenever we call this function, we just don't update this. Or we could just set this to nil if we really wanted to. But I'm feeling to just not update it. So I'll just say this right here. And then when I launch, you'll see that we do see the content unavailable view. But usually in like the real use case, this would be saying if the API call fails and you didn't get back some of that data, you would see this unavailable view. Or if, say, for some reason the endpoint really just returns you an empty array, you would see this unavailable view. So let's add this back. And then if we rerun, see that we see it again. Now I want to show you how you can see it, say, give you an example of seeing it if the error occurs. So to do it, we're gonna pretty much do what we did before. And we're just gonna make our error effect, we're gonna change our endpoint, right? And then it's gonna give us an error like this, right? And then if we click OK, now they have some detail on what might be happening still. It's not just a plain blank white screen. So I definitely prefer this experience more. So yeah. So now what we could do is let's add back the fix for that our endpoint to make sure that's still working. And let's rerun it again just to make sure. And we do see the names, which is perfect. So now the last thing we're going to add is a pull to refresh feature, because maybe the API updated and the user was in the phone for a long time and you want to drag the screen down to get fresh data. So to do that, all we have to do is jump to our baby names view. And we're going to add one new modifier, and this is going to be a dot refreshable, right? Then we're going to say await view model dot fetch, right? And now what will happen is, let me show you in the preview first. When we start dragging down, you see that spinner at the top? That's basically fetching new data. And you see this in manned apps, they use it a lot. Do it like that. And now I'll actually run it in the simulator. And when I pull to refresh, you see the spinner load and it fetches that data. You also see the progress view too, but the data is just returning so fast, you just get a quick glance of it. But yeah, so again, yeah, so we were able to build a popular baby names app using NYC Open Data and building it in SwiftUI. And again, I'll add the details to the endpoint in the description. This is a page. And again, if you want to get to the endpoint directly, just hit API here and then pretty much just copy the endpoint. More of these tutorials to come. If you enjoy this, just like, comment, and subscribe. All right.